thanks for joining today, everyone. My name is Jesse Wieland. I'm the Associate Director of the Office of National Fellowships. Also, if y'all want to briefly introduce yourselves, I have a couple of people joining me today. Might not be on camera, but.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Garcia-Glockner, Assistant Director of ONF.
I'm Keith McCall, Assistant Director of OGFA.
And so today we're going to be talking obviously about the Fulbright Fellowship, but specifically the English Teaching Assistantship. And so we're going to be going over all aspects of the application and the essays that you're going to need to go through as you're developing your materials. We're going to also discuss a couple examples of some previous applicants and talk a little bit about how they navigated the ETA application process and go over what components would, or how do you craft a competitive application both at the domestic level and at the international level. We're going to go through our dates and deadlines for our internal application process. We're going to talk about how our offices can support you, both the Office of Graduate Fellowships and Awards and the Office of National Fellowships. And then we'll make sure that we have some time for questions at the end. And if you would like to hang out, I'm also going to go through the website and I can show you how to navigate that because it's dense, very informative, but it's very dense. And so I'm not going to read to you all of the history for the Fulbright Fellowship, but this slide is always important to include because Fulbright's mission has remained the same since it was founded after the end of World War II. And so Fulbright, their main goal is to foster mutual peace and understanding between the United States and other countries. And so through the English Teaching Assistantship specifically, they're not just wanting to look at how are you going to be proficient in the classroom and what your pedagogical methods are, but in many cases, and we'll get into some of this detail later, they're wanting to see what you're engaged with outside of the classroom. Many of these ETAs have what are called supplemental projects that you do in addition to your classroom teaching, but even for the ETAs that don't have that, they're wanting to see how are you going out of your way to learn about the place, the culture, and the people, and wherever it is that you're applying. Well, moving on from there. So yes, this is an award that's funded by the U.S. State, the U.S. Department of State, and this is for students that are rising seniors, and we'll go over the timeline a little bit later. So we work with rising seniors all the way through doctoral candidates, and so the ETA application specifically, it brings students from so many different academic disciplines. The ETA exists differently in every country that you can look into. Whereas some may be looking for 40 hours a week you're in the classroom, whereas you can be in the classroom as little as 12 hours a week. And that's where that supplemental project that I mentioned could come into play. But this is an opportunity that I think can sometimes be miscategorized as just a gap year experience. And I feel like that in no way fully encapsulates what the opportunity can be. Because students, whether you're a bachelor's level candidate, master's or PhD level candidate, come to this opportunity for so many different reasons. And so depending on your specific interest, we can start pointing you toward maybe the best countries to apply to based on the nature of the ETA in that country. And so to be eligible, you do need to be a US citizen and you need to have your bachelor's degree by the time that you would start your Fulbright experience, which is why rising seniors are the earliest that we work with, because you would apply at the beginning of your fall semester of your senior year for an opportunity that would begin at earliest a year later. So if we're going to apply fall of 2022, this is going to be for fall 2023 start dates, or at late spring of at the latest spring of 2023. You do need to, regardless of the country that you apply to, you need to meet those minimum language requirements. And for the ETAs, that can range anywhere from beginner to intermediate to advanced. Plenty of countries also don't ask that you have any proficiency in the native language because you will be teaching English. And so the prerogative of some countries is that they want you to be a native English speaker and they want their students to be prioritizing that language. But that doesn't mean that in your own time, you can't be, or even before you would go, make the efforts to learn the language of wherever it is that you may be going as a means of cultural engagement. And then the last little bullet point, applicants just need to be in good health. That's something we can talk about in a one-on-one meeting if you have any concerns about that. But moving on to just a little bit about the specifics of the ETA experience. I've already touched on these a little bit, but for a Fulbright grant, they're going to cover all of your travel expenses to and from the country. They're going to cover your health insurance. They're going to cover your cost of living. And so that can take the form of a homestay, or in some cases, they will find an apartment for you near the school that you would be volunteering at. And they do provide you with a monthly stipend. And so there's no two Fulbrights that are worth the same. And so we usually just tell students that you're not going to be living lavishly during this experience, but they will make sure that you're taken care of. And so Fulbright exists in over 160 different countries, and I'll show this a little bit later when I go through the website, is that every country is going to have a different allotment of Fulbright awards, different types of Fulbrights, different numbers of Fulbrights. And like I said, for the ETA specifically, they range anywhere from 8 to 13 months. And the nature of that award is going to be different in every country that you apply to. So you want to make sure that you find one that best aligns with your interests and your skill set. You can only apply to one country, which again is why you need to be very intentional about where you're selecting and why you need to apply to this country and no other area. And so that's also something that we can flesh out in a one-on-one meeting, because I do get students every year that come to the ETAs that are, I want a cultural experience, I want to be abroad, I'm really flexible to where I could be. And then that's where we start looking at, like I've already mentioned, the specific nature of the ETA in these different countries and what type of experience would best suit them. And so in these English classrooms, it's the prerogative of some ETAs is that they are looking for career educators, but I believe that is going to be much more in the minority when compared to all ETAs available. What most destinations are looking for are not just people that can be English educators, but people that can share American culture as defined by the applicant. And so that's where, if you can find the perfect blend between when it comes to your pedagogical methods, this is how I'm going to help my students learn English, and this is how I'm going to weave in elements of American culture, elements of my culture into the classroom, or encourage students to reflect on their own experiences. So you can have a classroom experience that's both meeting the minimum requirement for the ETA, but also helping your students grow as just globally minded citizens. And so this is where specifically I think ETA applicants can really add a lot of nuance to their applications and really make their applications stand out at the national review level. And so to give you a couple examples of some previous students that I've worked with and how they've navigated the ETA process. So I worked with Brian for years and knew him from very early on in his undergraduate career until, well, now he's just finishing up his graduate studies at Ohio State University. But when we came to Fulbright initially, he actually applied the year before I transitioned from being a graduate student into a full-time employee in the office. And so I didn't work with him the first time that he applied. But when that first application, he applied to Kenya and didn't make it to the semifinalist stage, was just given a hard no. And so by the time that we formally started working together and started to pick this application up again, we had worked on a few others. And so he was in the midst of another fellowship opportunity when he came back to Fulbright. And our early conversations were, I know I could do this application better, and I really want to just, reanalyze why I'm going to Kenya and to just improve my pedagogical methods. And, we really just wanted to revamp everything. But his reasons for coming to the ETA is that a lot of his undergraduate experiences were all in around education and making education more accessible. He grew up in South Florida, and so grew up as speaking Haitian Creole and serving as that translator for his family. And so a lot of those experiences influenced what he wanted to do in the classroom and how he wanted to engage with his students. But he also had the far off goal after graduate school of working in educational policy and educational reform. And so while he was very interested in the in-classroom experience, it was everything surrounding education and educational reform and international education. That's where all of his interests lied. And he looked at the opportunity in Kenya specifically because it was an opportunity that was going to give him plenty of time in the classroom, but it also had the supplemental project. And so for his idea, and he talked about, so for example, for Kenya, they were looking for people that could not just educate their students in English, but had an interest in either sport or debate, or the arts. And so his past experience of working as a camp counselor really came into play in that regard, because he spoke to how he could not just teach English, but in very specific ways incorporate art into the classroom, and incorporate sport in his spare time. And then through his supplemental project, wanted to create like an informal, I think he called it chai chats, where over a cup of tea, he and his students after class could just talk about issues that were important to them, or just interesting topics regarding American culture, and so forth. And so, so while Brian's future career hopes are not specifically in the classroom, it's on that international educational scale that he was interested in this opportunity. Charlotte is a student that I worked with relatively recently, and her interest for the ETA, she was specifically looking for an opportunity to grow in her own Spanish proficiency. And so when Brian came to the opportunity, he was a little bit more open initially in terms of destination and ultimately settled on Kenya. Charlotte from the very get-go was, I know I want to apply to Spain. That's going to be the best destination for me. But when you go to Spain's page, one of the unique things about that location is that it gives you about 8 or 10 different regions within Spain, and has very specific number of allotments of ETA awards for those different regions in Spain. So it's not just, why do I need to apply to an ETA in Spain, but why do I need to apply to this specific region in Spain based on my skill set? And so Charlotte eventually settled on the Canary Islands, and it was specifically because she wanted to work with a younger population, but also in the Canary Islands, it also had a very high percentage of refugees in that area. And so some of her volunteer work in Tallahassee was working with that population as they are here, and wanted to bring that skill set over to the Canary Islands, because she thought she could be even more effective when working with those students, and making sure that she was facilitating a classroom that was encouraging her students to reflect on their own unique experiences, and building early on for younger populations that mutual understanding. And so she actually just wrapped up her experience in Spain, despite the challenges of the pandemic, which was exciting because it unfortunately has limited a lot of opportunities. But now that we're starting to get back to a sense of normalcy, a lot of these countries and Fulbright opportunities specifically are opening back up. Now, when looking at the online application, that's something we always encourage students to get started on early, because it's a very deconstructed resume. It just takes a lot of time to fill out. And so you don't want to wait until the very end to actually complete that information. So what the majority of the work that you're going to be doing with either myself, or Bonnie or Keith, or one of the other advisors that we have, is going over your essays. But we want to make sure that you're on top of all those other components as well. So make sure that you're slowly filling out all of the online application. Now, the two main essays that you're going to have, the statement of grant purpose and the personal statement, you only have one page single space to articulate everything that you want to include about why you're applying to where you're applying and what you want to do in that classroom. And when you consider the heading, you actually have 2 fewer lines than a full page. So brevity is key here. And so when it comes to the statement of grant purpose, I always encourage my students in that first paragraph, whether that's through personal anecdote, current events, data, whatever it may be, to find some tangible reason for why they've applied to the specific country or area in that country, like for Spain, for example, that they've chosen to apply to. And once they've made that establishment, then it's transitioning into, okay, so what are your pedagogical methods within the classroom? And very early on in early draft, students may say, well, I want to use games or Jeopardy in the classroom, or like pretty vague ideas. And I think that can be a really great place to start. But what you really want to do with the statement of grant purpose is start looking into the population that you'd be working with. In some countries, that can be a broad range from primary school education all the way up until adult education. And others, they are very specific that will be working with college age students or exclusively with younger students. So you want to make sure that you're being cognizant of that population, but as I mentioned earlier, that you're finding ways to weave in American culture into your lesson plans again as you define it. That's going to take up the majority of the essay, but then we also need to make sure that dependent on the location, if there is a supplemental project, that we're also allotting space or a good paragraph for you to talk about what you're doing outside of the classroom to either complement what you're doing in the classroom, or like I said earlier, to learn about the culture, the place, and the people. In the personal statement, you don't have a full page exactly to write about yourself. I tell my students you have about, at best, 3/4, but usually about half a page to tell me about yourself and your experience, what has brought you to Fulbright or what has brought you to wanting to pursue this opportunity, before we then need to spend that last quarter, that last half of your essay, circling back to either addressing, okay, so why Fulbright, or where do you hope this opportunity is going to take you in your academic or professional career? And something I should have, that I wanted to go back and touch on when it comes to the online application. Another important part about not putting that off is that there's about 3 or 4 short answer questions in that in the online application that can add, because of how limited the space is for the ETA, that can add even more nuance and depth to your argument. There's a short answer about why you're pursuing this opportunity. Obviously, we don't want to regurgitate what you have in your statement of grant purpose, so we want to find another way to articulate that. There's a question about your host country engagement. That could be an expansion of what you've included in your statement of grant purpose, but that could also just be complementary and then add just even another layer to what you're wanting to do. And then there's a question about your post-Fulbright plans. And so we want to see, we don't want to just fixate so much on why you're pursuing the Fulbright experience that we completely forget, okay, so what do you hope to do after? And so whether that's graduate school, whether that's pursuing a career relative to education, or whether that's pursuing future language study, whatever that may be, we want to make sure that we flesh that out. When it comes to the language evaluation form, that is going to, so if it's required for your country, we'll talk about finding a faculty member or someone who can evaluate your reading, your speaking, and your listening skills, and to be able to make sure that you meet that minimum threshold for the country that you're applying to. But even for countries that don't require that you have any proficiency in that language, you can do a self-evaluation in your application if you do have any relevant skills in other languages that you think would be helpful for this opportunity. Now, a little bit different than the other types of Fulbright applications for the reference forms. So you don't need 3 letters of recommendation, you need 3 references. And so, and we can always provide you with that form, but it is about 5 or 6 questions that ask that your recommenders will need to fill out, that asks about your ability to engage across cultural differences, examples where you've demonstrated leadership or mentorship, and just to be able to speak to your character. And so when we can share those forms with you, and we always encourage that once you've identified your 3 recommenders, ideally, faculty members are always great references for Fulbright, but whomever it is, that you sit down and have a conversation with them, because I'm sure there's plenty of those questions they could answer on their own. But just in years past, some students will comment that, I mean, this person has seen me in the classroom, they've seen me as a student, they maybe haven't seen me in that mentor role per se. But that's why we encourage you to reach out to them early, so you can sit down and have those conversations with your recommenders and be able to fill in the blanks for them, or be able to share not just your resume, but perhaps those early drafts of your essays so they can get an idea for why you're pursuing this. You do need to include all transcripts from every institution that you've attended. And of course, don't forget, if you haven't, to register for your passport, which you can do in the stadium. So if you're on campus, you can do that here. So components of a strong application, like I've already mentioned a few times, that commitment to Fulbright's mission, that commitment to that mutual peace and understanding between the U.S. and between other countries. The limited in-country experience rarely ever comes into play. I've had plenty of students that have applied to countries that they either spent years of their life growing up in, or they spent extended time in, but maybe they've been gone for a few years, and that's totally fine. Where students may get tripped up by that is if you have dual citizenship. 9.9 times out of 10, that's going to preclude you from applying to that country. But in some cases, like Mexico, for example, they do allow dual citizens to apply for an ETA opportunity in country. Where it may prohibit you from applying is if you've, say, been in that country for more than 6 months or currently in that country when you're applying, and you're using the Fulbright to extend that stay even longer. That's where we may get into a little bit of a muddy area. Like I said, you need to meet that minimum threshold for the language, or even if it's not required, maybe you can show ways either at a nearby university or NGO or other organization where you could engage with the language if you would like to. The next bullet point is usually where a lot of students do, or where they are challenged initially, is finding ways to make your reasons for applying to that country and that country alone fully fleshed out in your essays, and to really highlight that in multiple ways. I have plenty of sample essays that I'd be happy to share with students as we start developing your ideas, because every student comes to these ETAs for different reasons. And so I've had students that have looked at, for example, Argentina, where if my memory serves me correct, you are going to be working with college students, and I think almost exclusively college students if you were to apply to that country. And so a student I worked with a couple of years ago in trying to figure out those reasons for why they were best suited as a student who was studying Spanish for Argentina and say not Chile or any other Spanish-speaking country in Central or South America, they ended up looking at graduation rates for high school students and graduation rates for college students in Argentina, and those retention rates, and how through their style of teaching, which they wanted to focus on professionalism, development of resumes, and thinking about life after college, they were able to flesh out, okay, so I would be most effective here because I can not only help my students get to college, but I can make sure that when they're in college, they can see the value of what they're studying and what they're doing. Obviously, there's more nuance to it than that, but that's just kind of a specific example. So you really want to hone in on why you're applying to country X and not country Y. Feasibility is important for any Fulbright project. And so in the case of the ETAs, you want to make sure that your in-classroom methods, I guess a good example of that is a few years ago, a student was wanting to apply to a country in Southeast Asia. I don't recall which specifically, but the nature of the ETAs were they intentionally wanted to put you in rural parts of the country. And this student had an idea where they were really wanting to lean into pedagogical methods that incorporated technology, and you needed access to the internet and computers, and their ideas were great. But it's like, well, have you considered where you're applying to? And you may not have that consistent connection. Therefore, I like what you're wanting to do, but it doesn't vibe with the nature of the ETA to where you're applying. So maybe we could find a different destination, or maybe we could find methods that don't require such high-tech computers or internet to be able to access these types of teaching methods. And the last thing is that throughout your application and all of your essays, we want you to be, we want everything that you're writing about to be authentic. We want it to be relevant, and working with us, we hope that we can make it compelling at the national level. Okay. So to kind of touch on our process and our timeline, and so Fulbright is one of the to be blunt, it's one of the hardest applications that we work with. And it's because so much has to go into the initial planning and really finding the best opportunity for you. But because of how short and concise your essays are, that takes a lot of time to develop to make sure that we're, and I'm not exaggerating, that the words, the literal word choice that you use in your essays doesn't take up too much space. And we're able to, be able to make sure that we're getting your point across in as little space as possible. But anyways, the first deadline that we have is going to be June 1st. And the project proposal essentially is first drafts of your essay, at the very least. They don't need to be good. We just need to see what you've done thus far and what your plans and ideas are. We also hope that by that June 1st deadline, you have an idea of who, or you have immediately or already contacted your recommendation form writers and talk to them about your plans. Because the majority of this application process is going to occur between June 1st and that late August, the August 24th deadline. And that's our campus deadline for full and complete applications. We want to see final drafts of your essays. We want to have all 3 recommendation forms submitted. We want to have your language evaluation form submitted, all of those short answers in your application finalized, because we download all of those applications and share them with our FSU Fulbright faculty committee that is made up of former Fulbrighters, other faculty on campus who come from departments where we get a lot of applicants on any given year, and just people who really intimately know this process and what they're looking for in a Fulbrighter. And so we schedule an interview in mid-September for them to essentially ask very pertinent questions, but also to give you feedback on your essay to make it even stronger. And then once you get that feedback, the next 2 things that happen are you have about 2.5 weeks or about 2 weeks to implement that feedback before that final campus deadline on October 3rd. But we also have one of the committee members from the interview who agrees to write your CCE form, or your campus committee evaluation form. And that is essentially a 1-page, similar to the recommendation forms, but it's like the formal seal of approval that says Florida State University endorses this applicant. And it's also where the faculty member can add a lot more about you as an applicant that maybe you don't have the space to write about in your essays or in your short answers. And I think a really good example of that was a student of ours that just recently was endorsed for their ETA application to Spain. And going back and reading her application, I was reviewing the CCE form for the faculty, and just that faculty member just wrote such a glowing review of not just the applicant's character, but their passions and their skill set, and how this opportunity specifically related to their future aspirations. And of course, that was in the application, but hearing that other perspective from that faculty member, it added a lot more depth to their application. And so the CCE form is not going to make or break whether you do or do not receive a Fulbright, but it definitely adds nuance. And from having sat in on review committees for Fulbright in the past, I can tell you it's something that these review committees do talk about, and it can, when they're ranking, maybe bump one student above or below another student, depending on that CCE form. Regardless, so on October 3rd, that's when we want all of our students to resubmit their applications with those edits so we can attach the CCE forms. And then that begins our very long waiting process, where yesterday, well, actually, yes, it was Thursday, so it was today? I don't know what day it is anymore, but our applicants from this past cycle just found out that they were pushed forward as semifinalists or not. So you're looking at a late January notification, and for the students that are notified that they're moving forward, that email either includes a congratulations, this is your interview time, or a congratulations, continue waiting, in more words. But so for some students, they have to wait until March or April to find out if they've been selected. For other students, there is that interview process that follows up, which is why we have that on-campus interview, because you do get feedback, the CCE form, but it's also really good preparation for what you could see at the national level. And so if you find out you're a semifinalist, that means the American Review Committee has pushed your application forward to the host country for final review and selection. And that's when you hear back in March or April. And if you are notified of that, you'll be notified of your orientation that usually occurs over the summer, your pre-departure orientation, and then your formal start date, which is usually August or September, but for ETAs, it can also be January, February of the following year. So as you can see, it is from the time that we are talking now and when we could start working on your application, it could be a full 1.5 years before you actually would start your Fulbright experience. And so for any student that I work with on this process, my recommendation to them, and this is from the students that I think are my most competitive applicants, to my students who I think have a good shot, but maybe a little bit more experience, either through graduate study or internships or whatever it may be, may help them come back even stronger next year. From the full spectrum, I encourage them that Fulbright should never be your be-all, end-all. You should never put all of your eggs into one Fulbright basket. And it's just because the opportunity is just, it's competitive, and it really just boils down to that. And so I tell my students after we work on their Fulbright applications and submit it, to essentially proceed through the rest of the fall and spring semesters, that Fulbright is not an option. Because you really will, when you hear about the semifinalist status, that's really as soon as Fulbright has left your brain, and then it just instantly reminds you like, oh yeah, I applied to that thing. But the reason I tell students that is because I want to make sure that you are applying for graduate school, you're applying for jobs, you're planning for that postgraduate experience, so you have options. And then if Fulbright does work out, and we have many examples of this every year, where students have applied to Fulbright, and then say applied to medical school or applied to whatever they plan to do after their time at Florida State, get accepted to medical school, and then we had that student who found out they got their Fulbright, and then they were just able to defer enrollment for a full year, so they could go and have this Fulbright experience and then come back and enroll in their postgraduate plans. And so most opportunities, from my experience, are willing to work with students who find out this great news, because whatever that entity is, whether it's another university or a job or a sort of specific internship, they also look better if they have Fulbrighters participating in their opportunities. So just to reiterate, we'll work on your Fulbright application and make sure that it's something that's prim and polished, but we also want to make sure that you are looking at other opportunities and experiences if Fulbright doesn't work out, to make sure you have either an international experience that you're looking for, or something that's still going to develop your skill set, your knowledge, and build your resume. And so how Ogpa and ONF can help you is we can, and for the ETA specifically, that, like I said before, it can be very hard for some students initially to know where they should apply to, where's the best mutual fit. And so we can reflect with you on your skill set, on your interests, and find the best placement, or give you at least a few options. Obviously, from everything that I've said and all the application components that you need to take care of, that's a lot for any one person. And so working with us, we make sure we can manage all of those components, check in with you, make sure we're putting you in connection with the right people to help. Whether that's like, for Fulbright specific questions, reaching out to the organization, or in-country questions, whatever it may be, we're here to help. When it comes to the references, for some students, that can be kind of a new process and asking for letters of recommendation. And so we want to make sure that you're choosing the right people that can best speak to your skills and interests. And we also have writing workshops. We have one coming up in April for personal statement writing, but we also try to pair applicants with other applicants just to get as many eyes on your application as possible. We've also done advisor swaps in the past just to get different feedback. And then, of course, we do have contacts within Fulbright that if you do have a specific question or concern, we can always make sure to help you with that. So this is all of our information. So at the top, you have OGFA. So if you're a graduate student, please reach out to Dr. McCall or Dr. Stevenson. And if you're an undergraduate student, reach out to myself or Bonnie. And we'd love to set up a time to chat with you about your ideas, the Fulbright experience, not just the ETAs, but we can definitely dig more into that if you're certain that's the right opportunity for you, and just get started on this application. We obviously still have a lot of time, so there's not too much urgency that we need to start right now, but we can at least get the ball rolling to make that process easier over the summer when we know students have internships or other opportunities and experiences that are going to require a lot of their time. And so I know I've been talking for a very long time, but I would love to answer, and feel free to type in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, we can go over any questions that you may have. And if you'd like to stay, I would love to bring up the website and go through that with you as well. But thank you so much for listening to me ramble about Fulbright. But questions, feel free.